Coming up on today's Locked On Bucks, we recap day 3 of training camp in Irvine, California. We heard from Doc Rivers and some very interesting things that we heard from Doc Rivers about the way this team is going to play next year, potentially adding a new coach down the road. And Damian Lillard gives another interview as well. So Camille and I recap all of that and get you set for the preseason debut this weekend. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks.
You are Locked On Bucks, your daily Milwaukee Bucks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Bucks. I'm Justin Garcia, joined as always by Camille Davis. We thank you for making Locked On Bucks your first listen of the day. Free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can find us on YouTube as well. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Bucks is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So it was day 3 of training camp out there in Irvine, California, Camille, and the first day was the Hope Springs Eternal Day, where it's okay, the guys are back. We're getting these images of guys in practice gear playing 5-on-5. Let's go. And now in the next couple of days, and the elephant in the room too, is that Rajon Rondo that I see on the court with the Bucks? And now we've progressed more and more, where we heard a lot from Doc Rivers yesterday about that Rajon Rondo piece, and I think about how different this team is going to look on both sides of the ball this year.
Yeah, a little information coming out for the Bucks. The Rajon Rondo piece of it, with the ESPN article going a little bit more in depth about what Rondo is doing with the team. I had to laugh at the Doc Rivers quote where he's like, "You'll be seeing a lot of Rajon Rondo, but like I'm not telling you much more than that."
Right.
But to see that this is something that Rondo has been interested in, we've heard from multiple teams about when Rondo was on their team, they felt like they had another coach on the floor. You think about the Lakers and the bubble championship that they won and how much they talked about how big of a part Rondo was in helping them achieve that. Even though the numbers weren't gaudy, it's a lot of the mentality and what he's able to do behind the scenes as well. So hearing that Rondo was like, you know what? I could see myself being a coach. I would enjoy this. And he gets married this summer and Doc's there like, hey, you need to get into coaching like immediately. So to see Rondo, even the fact that there were rumors, that he was somebody sought after for JJ Redick's staff in LA. Rondo in the article didn't want to comment on if he had any other coaching or offers, but to see the fact that he is in Milwaukee alongside Doc Rivers, the Doc Rivers recruiting. It has no limits. It's players, it's coaches, it's guest coaches, I guess we should say for Rondo's case. But I think it's really cool to see him around the team, even if this is another body to add to the coaching staff. Although it's not official, it's kind of like a half ad, I guess you would say.
Yeah, and I know people were pointing out in the comments and on Reddit as well. Like, I mean, Jason Kidd had guest coaches all the time, which is true. And I don't think Bud did, but we also wouldn't know. Bud did. So it's not uncommon. I think it's more just the size of the staff, as we've often joked about, and it is smaller technically than it was a year ago. But that was the one thing I was talking about with one of the national guys that I've referenced on this show before, just the other day. And he was kind of down on the Bucks, and we were going back and forth over things that I observed at Media Day. And the reason that you and I are reasons that we've pointed out our optimism. And, one of the big things I just said, look, the vibes are much different. You just kind of had to be there to experience it, not only on Media Day, but through the year, that it just felt like a weird year last year. And I know every team is going to be like this, that best shape of their life. These are my favorite teammates, and this is the best player we could have gotten. But it was markedly different on Media Day. Even if you go back to last year, the story was just Damian Lillard. And if you took away that euphoria, there was a lot of weird vibes of we don't know what to expect from Griff. You had the elephant in the room with Terry Stotts leaving a week before training camp. we questioned even before that the staff in general of not just, Griff's unproven. Let's see what we get in him. But other than Joe Prunty, once Terry Stotts left, I don't know what you really have here in terms of experience. So all of that, much different than it is this year. And the coaching piece for me was just as big because it's night and day, the difference in the staff. When you think about guys, and this isn't taking shots at them, but guys, I don't even want to single anyone out to make it seem like I am, but guys that just weren't in that spot before. They were further down the bench or in the second row, and now they're essentially the lead assistant or sharing that with Joe Prunty. You look at this year where you have Rex Kalamian, you have Dave Yeager, who was a head coach, you have Joe Prunty, who's been a head coach a couple
Darvin Ham.
Darvin Ham, who's been a head coach, Greg Buckner, who was the associate head coach with the Cavs. So you just have experience and adults in the room with this, and you add to it a player, like you said, I know it's not adding to the staff, but around the team in Rajon Rondo, who was viewed as a coach on the floor, who was one of the more cerebral players in the league, that I just feel much better about where this team is headed, the course that they're taking. And for other names we'll get to in this show, young guys like AJ Johnson, and we've mentioned, Andre Jackson Jr., but for them to get real-time hands-on experience with that staff, but with a player not far removed from his playing days, who thought about the game the way that he did in Rajon Rondo, I think is going to be huge for this team.
I could not agree more with that. I mean, you think about just the characters on this team in the sense, like you mentioned what Rondo can bring as a guest coach for some of the young guys on the team, as well as the vets as well. But you think about the team, this is a team that has Damian Lillard, it has Giannis Antetokounmpo, it has Khris Middleton, and then you think about those young guys, as we've been mentioning a lot this summer, AJ Green, Tyler Smith, AJ Johnson, Andre Jackson, Marjon Beauchamp. Like, this is a really solid group of vets to really learn from, to pick up from, in addition to guys like DeLon Wright and Taurean Prince, who have made a career in the NBA by doing the little things, by being stars in their role. Like, they were never asked to be the superstar, but they have roles that they need to star in. So I think like the combination of talent on this roster, plus the coaching staff, I mean, seeing the videos out of media day and training camp and just how happy everyone seems to have Darvin Ham back in the spot. Like, it's like you mentioned, the vibes are really different, but just the collection of minds and the talent and the experience that they have to be able to try to put together into this particular group, I'm really excited about, because again, it's a Bucks championship team, a team with championship expectations, I should say. And generally speaking, in those teams, the young guys don't get too much run. But with the makeup of this particular team, with, as we've heard all summer, the 6 returning vets, the 3 vets added through free agency, the young vets, and then the young guys, like, it's a really good mix of young and old on this roster. So I was already excited for the season to get here after, we were done early. But to see everything going into the training camp, the optimism in the air, just I'm so excited to get to it.
Leave your thoughts in the comments as well about the vibe check for this team, where you were at a year ago versus what we've observed through the offseason and what we've started to see coming out of California and, of course, from Media Day. But there was a lot that Doc Rivers had to say, not only about Rajon Rondo, about the way his team plays. I think that was probably the most interesting things that we heard from Doc in his brief appearance with the media yesterday. We'll get into what those changes could mean and what it is possibly that he's hinting at coming up next here on Locked On Bucks. Time to talk to you about our friends now over at Game Time. And you've heard Camille and I mention them quite a bit here in terms of ticket buying experience. I mentioned I just used them the other day to get tickets to see my beloved St. Louis Blues tomorrow night in Milwaukee against the Chicago Blackhawks. But let me tell you why Game Time is that number one app for you to use to find those tickets. Maybe you're checking off a stadium tour or arena tour. What better way to do so than see what your view is going to look like? You can get a panoramic view from your seats within the app before you buy your tickets. Toggle on the all-in pricing feature, and that will show you the fees up front. So you get to check out with no sticker shock, no surprise fees there when including this feature. You also get the lowest price guarantee, where Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference if you find those seats cheaper elsewhere. And best of all, your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that code LOCKEDONNBA, LOCKEDONNBA, for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. So I mentioned we heard a lot from Doc Rivers in a short amount of time in his media availability yesterday, Camille, and he was asked about the defense of, you observed a lot, and we saw the dead cat bounce, if you will, when Doc Rivers arrived, and that defense was, man, here we go. This is what we were expecting. And then it slowly started to regress through the tail end of the year. But the general question was just, what have you observed of the defense, and, what's going to change? We didn't get an X's and O's answer, but he did say we're going to do things differently and said, look, we know the way that we need to play. When we do that, we think we're going to be really good and very improved defensively. We're going to change things, and we're going to do things a little bit differently. But I think that we know the way we need to play. I mean, I don't know about you, Camille. I have no other way to interpret it other than we need to be flexible, as we've talked about, throughout the offseason, and versatility was that word. We need that, but we got to protect the rim. We got Brook Lopez. We got Giannis. If we do that, a lot of it is going to be cleaned up. We weren't doing either last year. We weren't protecting the rim enough. We weren't defending on the perimeter. We still have some strides to go on the perimeter, but we have the ability to protect the rim. So let's take that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about basketball in its simplest terms, it's like the offense is trying to find an advantage to attacking the defense and vice versa. So it's like, what can you do to shore up your defense to try to put the offense in a disadvantageous position? What can you do? And you have to rely on the strengths and the weakness of your roster. We know what Brook Lopez's strength is as a drop center. We need Brook by the rim. And last year, thinking about this team and how there was just kind of a lack of strong point of attack defenders and what that meant for this team and the kind of pressure it put on Brook Lopez as that last line of defense. I think during one game last season, after a game, I think it might have been me and Frank, and we were talking about, well, maybe they should switch a little bit more just because if you're getting beat, just switch really quickly so that you can at least keep a body in front of somebody. So I do wonder if they incorporate a little bit more of that. But more than anything else, hearing the fact that it seems like the team is bought in to whatever changes that are being made defensively is what gives me the most hope about what we're going to see with this Bucks team, because buy-in is a crucial aspect of it. If you don't feel like it's going to be successful, you're not going to try to run it the way it needs to be ran. So again, it's early, it's training camp. The vibes are still really high, really good, but it seems like the Bucks, the changes that they've been making are things that the team is on board with.
Yeah, look, I think it's probably easy to buy into that too when you experience what you did last year and say, okay, we got to do something that works. Everything we tried last year just didn't work. So we're buying in here. We're willing to listen to what you have to say. Not to say they didn't last year, but it's just also the coaching pedigree in the room. I think that was a big part of last year too, when you could tell. I think you mentioned it when we did our media day recap. Compare Brook Lopez this year to a year ago, where you could see at media day, Brook Lopez hinting at, they want us to do things differently. I don't think it's going to work. Essentially, read between the lines is what he said. Part of that too, I'm sure, is the coaching staff that we just talked about, where it's, I mean, what's the experience other than an assistant and second row guy on the bench to point to and say, look, we worked with players X, Y, and Z, and this worked. You can do that when you're Rex Kalamian. You can do that when you're Doc Rivers, when you're Greg Buckner and that group. So I think that also increases the buy-in rate for this team that I don't think was low to begin with. So I'm very curious to see what these things are on defense. And again, if we're correct in the assumption we're making, if we know the way we need to play, I'm inclined to think that's what we've seen a lot in the Bud era. But what are those changes you're going to sprinkle in? And is it more switching, like you said? They certainly added more guys that are capable of it. And Doc singled out Gary Trent Jr. as well in that brief appearance with the media, saying, look, we know what he's capable of. We know he can fill it up and score, but he can defend, and we're going to ask him to do that. We heard that about Malik Beasley last year, and I think we all raised an eyebrow, but I think the assumption this year is, I mean, it can't be worse than it was with Beasley, and they've at least added the key pieces around him. When you think about DeLon Wright and you think about Taurean Prince and guys that can fit in with that switching style defense, any growth that we see as well from Andre Jackson Jr. So they're seemingly quietly checking off a lot of boxes here throughout the offseason. But it didn't stop there in terms of the changes. Doc said on both sides of the ball. And I don't remember what the exact quote was, but he referenced 3-point shooting. And the gist of it was, we have guys that can shoot and that are good shooters, and they're going to have the green light. But I got the sense the way he framed this, they're not going to be bombing away threes again, where last year they were top 5 in both attempts and makes. I wouldn't be surprised. I don't think they're going to slide into the middle of the pack, but I think that's going to take a step backward. You think about teams that were behind the Bucks and the Phoenix Suns and the Knicks. Those are certainly two teams that are going to jump up in their 3-point attempts. But he specifically referenced efficiency and looking for shots all around the floor. Gary Trent Jr. is a guy that I think would stand out in that regard. Damian Lillard, too. When we talk about this bounce back season, it's not just Dame driving to the basket and taking those deep threes. It's Dame scoring from all around the floor. You add into that what we heard from Brooke Lopez the other day, too, about, I've worked on ball handling, I've worked on short rolls, and not just being the floor stretcher spacing type of big. That probably should have been the biggest tell to move forward to this conversation from Doc.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one of those things too, where I remember a game when the Bucks they didn't have many of the starters, and Doc was just like, we're going to be a lot of threes put up today because, we're short-handed. We're just going to put up a lot of threes. But the Bucks, as you mentioned, they were, top 5 in makes and attempts. So it's not as if, or top 5 in attempts. I think they were top 10 in makes, but
in
percentage wise. Yeah. So it's like one of those things where you're looking at, like, they weren't bad at it. It's just the fact of we're trying to diversify, it seems like, the offensive game and try to score at all 3 levels. Like, it's a big court. We don't have to just, fire up threes all the time. But the Brooke Lopez piece of it, as you mentioned, should have been the very first thing. Like, maybe that number comes back a little bit, because Brooke Lopez has really operated primarily as like that stretch big. And there have been times when we've been like, hey, we need to get some more Brooke out here. Like, we want to see Brooke operating a bit more around the rim, because he has a size advantage over so many guys in the league. And on top of that, he has a great touch around the rim as well. So just being able to diversify the offense, I think, should be a benefit to the team. I don't think that is going to drop a crazy level, because you do have a Damian Lillard on your team, somebody who is one of the best 3-point shooters, especially with the way that he can stretch out that range, given the fact that once Dame crosses half court, he's in range. So you don't want to necessarily clip his wings in that sense, but I think diversifying the offense is going to do some good for him.
Yeah, they were at about 43% of their field goal attempts were threes for essentially the last 3 years. It was just over 40% in the title year. It was around 40% prior to that. The Bucks aren't the only team there. I mean, the Celtics were way beyond that, and it's just where we've moved to. I think, to that last point that you made, it was, I don't want to say easier to talk yourself into. It was easier to understand with the makeup of previous squads, because all of your offense inside the 3-point line was essentially Giannis. And depending on the shot diet of Khris Middleton, whatever Bud was allowing at the time, those mid-range shots. And that's another name we didn't mention who would factor in heavily here with those efficient shots and hunting them from all around the floor. But you didn't have individual creators in the scoring sense where you could have that quote unquote diversified offense. It was easier to just say, we got Giannis, he needs space, let him attack, and just have guys spacing the floor around him. That's my only hesitation of, let's see, because you can't swing too far away, because you're going to boggle up this thing called spacing for Giannis. But but I don't assume it's going to go all the way in the other direction where that's the conversation we're having. So that's one of the very interesting things to keep an eye on, potentially as early as Sunday. That's the other thing, Camille, is we're very curious of not only thankfully that the Bucks basketball season is back now, but what do we expect to see Sunday in Detroit when the preseason officially begins? So we will get into that conversation and start to wrap things up here. Coming up next on Locked On Bucks. Well, NFL fans, you can now start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's right, $200 for placing your first $5 bet. It doesn't even have to win. Get started right now heading over to FanDuel.com. So it's finally here, Camille. Sunday nights,
Finally.
the preseason begins for the Bucks as we record this Friday morning. It is what, 40, 50, it's about 60 hours away. Let's just put it at that it's here, basically. So I'm very curious to see what we see. You know, how much do guys play? When we talked about, hey, are we going to get a glimpse of how different the offense and defense are as early as Sunday? The only reason I say maybe is because one of my bigger takeaways that I still remember, I think it was Eric and a few others that I was talking about with this a year or so ago, was, you know, it was a year ago when Griff came in, and that was the other question of what's going to look different. And you just thought back to Bud's first year. And I remember that first preseason game where you saw the amount of threes. I think it was 50 plus threes they took in that game. And you were thinking, holy cow, is this us now? Like, we're going to do this? Okay. So you had to tell there early. Again, I don't think anything is going to be as extreme as it was to go from Jason Kidd to Bud in year 1.5 with Doc, but it is going to be interesting to see what we see differently, if anything, from the offense especially.
Yeah, and I think that picks up on the conversation we were having in the last segment as well. And I see this comment came in from R.R. Smith, which I agree with, and I think that's something we might see. And R.R. Smith was just mentioning the fact, like, we want to see efficient usage of the floor. Brooke is a more consistent option for pick and roll, more diversified sets and option to keep everyone connected versus running into a corner and just watching. I mean, one thing that we've heard a lot about, you know, Pat Connaughton's game is like he's a great cutter. He's a great cutter, and the things that he can open up from that ability. And just seeing what other guys are they going to put in those actions. Like, I'm curious to see what it looks like on Sunday. I'm curious to see who plays on Sunday as well, because what we're seeing out of training camp, I love the Bucks put together like the little hype video of all like this video footage from training camp so far. Seeing the guys, it's been in the comments with guys remarking at how good Brooke Lopez looked in the pictures and the videos. Like, Bobby looks really good. We've been seeing a lot of AJ Johnson in these clips and the pictures, and I'm just really curious to see how much playing time he gets in this preseason game as well. Like, it's a time of the year where, you know, we're getting ready to start the season up. Not sure how many minutes you're going to really see from the starters, but really interested in seeing a lot of guys on this roster, you know, finally get on the court and hoop together.
That was the other thing I'm glad you brought up. You and I were talking about it before we started recording. Is I don't. It's just like, you know, what we experienced last night of here we go, but you know, you're getting yourself ready for disappointment. I don't want to reach that point. But man, were we wrong on AJ Johnson? Because I know there's a lot of everydayers out there, not in terms of what we think about his future, but this year, because I know a lot of the everydayers pounded the comments. If this guy's going to contribute this year, trust me. And, you know, you and I are like, I don't know, like, they've already got a lot of young guys. It's a vet team. There's a lot of positions that you're going to have to leapfrog here. I'll believe it when I see it. He's young. He's raw. I think they have something. I just don't think it's this year. And as you pointed out, there's been a lot of video of him from camp, featured prominently, defending Damian Lillard, running the offense, attacking Giannis and Brooke Lopez in the paint. What we saw at Summer League, I still don't think he plays in more than 35 games, and it's going to be very, very limited minutes at that. But if we're wrong, I think that's a very, very good thing for the Bucks, because that means the talent is undeniable, that we have to find a way to get this guy on the floor. And I went from, I get why you made the pick. I'm very interested to see what happens with him because of the age and the talent level that he had. Like, you might as well play the lottery here, similar to what you did with Giannis. And then your hopes were raised when you saw him in summer league. I'm fully in on him, that I think there is something. I don't think it's this year, but if we're wrong, I don't see it being a bad thing. I think it means it's unassailable. We have to have this guy on the floor.
And that's what they mentioned even during the opening presser of bringing AJ and Tyler into Milwaukee, of just like, and they admitted it themselves, both players, of like, we know this is a vet team. We know we're going to have to earn our minutes. So we have to get out there and show the coaching staff that we deserve to be on the floor. We've heard it said already this offseason of like, there'll be opportunity for these guys to play. Again, not saying opportunity to play as if we expect for them to be out there 25 minutes a game or anything like that, but a chance to get on the floor. And if they are proving themselves behind closed doors in training camp throughout the season in practice, we would see them more and more. And again, like I said, going into the season, I was like, I'm not sure how much we see of these guys, but if we do see more, that's nothing but a positive, because like you said, it means that they are showing a lot of talent and flashes to the point where Doc wants to see what they can do against other teams as well. I mean, that's part of what got AJ Green on the court last season when Doc came in, where he was seeing him behind scenes and he's like, okay, like you kind of cook
has
it up.
to play. Yeah.
Right. Like we got to find a way to get him on the court and see what this looks like. So if that's the case for these young guys, for these rookies, we should say, because those are the two young guys we're talking about in particular, more so AJ Johnson than Tyler Smith at the moment. But opportunity is there because he is a bigger guard as well. Yeah. 6'5", 6'6", with crazy speed, change of direction. So like the talent, the flashes are there. So I would love to see more of him, because that just means he's a bit further along than what I envisioned when they even made that pick at 23 for him.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. Is we had the conversation over the summer about those two specifically, and Tyler and AJ, and who was most likely to see playing time. And the interesting part was, even though we laid out the case of, well, I think you could make an argument there's a more clear path in front of Tyler before we started to see other developments. Mm-hmm. Just because Brooke is older and Bobby is younger than Giannis, but it's just Giannis, Brooke, and Bobby that you have in that front court. Ever since, my guy, Chris Livingston, has kind of assumed that role of maybe we have this guy to play as a backup big. You have Taurean Prince as well. So the door has started to close a bit there in that regard. But I think the big thing that just keeps bringing me back to AJ Johnson is the speed that he plays at. They have none of that. They have Andre Jackson Jr. was the only guy that could handle the ball and push it up the floor. But as Giannis even said, I think at media day, he likes to get the ball, grab and go off the glass and push it down the floor. And Dame is a pure point guard who likes to bring it up, set the offense, and get things going. That was a big part of their adjustment a year ago. So it's finding the minutes with your elite athletic group on the floor that could really benefit him when you have, like we talked about early in the season last year, those early minutes where it was Andre and Rajon playing together and Giannis was on the floor with him. I remember one of those early games where they were busting it down the floor on a fast break, and Giannis was almost caught off guard. Like, whoa, these guys beat me down the floor. I'm used to being the quickest one and the first one down there. So I think there's something there. And I think that's the biggest thing that you like is just, you mentioned the size in terms of his wingspan and height, but he pushes the ball and he plays at a different gear and at a different speed than this team has. And they're going to have to see that throughout the course of the season. So that may be where he's, even more valuable behind the scenes, is when you get ready for some of those matchups, you're going up against that in practice. And it's not just Andre, or it's not just Rajon, where you had one or two guys in years past. Now you can sprinkle out there, okay, young guys, push it. So we know how to defend this and we know how to set up against this.
Yeah, similar to when they had to bring in some like the herd guys and the young guys to prep for that Pacer series where they're like, just run to the point when they weren't even taking the ball out bounds. They were just taking out the net and going. And then they figured out, oh, that's how y'all was moving so quick. Like we were wondering how the pace was so quick. But to your point about that, I mean, again, one thing that this Milwaukee Bucks team has been missing over the last season was that athleticism. And Doc talked about how the team needed to add more of that in the offseason. And it seems as if like these young guys can really bring that in a lot of different areas, but they're just going to have to show that they're consistent and ready to be able to play. So I think them getting some opportunities in the preseason is going to, be really cool to see because we get a chance to finally see with our own eyes of how things are starting to look. And again, you can't judge a player off of, 4 preseason games. It's a long season, beginning of careers or early on in careers as well. But I'm really excited to see what it looks like for these guys, especially because, as we mentioned, what the Bucks have been missing: perimeter or point of attack defenders, athleticism, and seeing some of the free agent ads as well as some of the young guys on the team. Like they seem to have some possible answers to those questions on the roster, but we have to just see how it actually looks in real time, especially when you're mixing in lineups with the guys who we know are established and going to be playing some big minutes with Giannis, with Khris, with Dame, with Brooke, so on and so forth.
Yeah, one of the last things to touch on here, one of the comments coming in about their defense will be the story. Improved defense. That's what we're banking on, that it has to be, because for this team to get to where we're saying we think they can get to, I don't know what the number is. And Doc talked about that at media day too of, there's a number, like, I don't know what the number is, but there is a number. It can't be where it was a year ago. So like, even with Giannis and Dame looking like, hey, this is exactly what we envisioned with this pairing, your defense has to be better than league average. And I do think, as much as, we've brought up the level of concern that the one thing it's missing is that bigger wing defender and who's going to take on, Jaylen Browns and Jason Tatum's and that on a regular basis. But they are in a much better spot defensively than they were a season ago. So now it's just a matter of seeing, okay, how much can we get back closer to where we were under Bud, like somewhere around 11. Can you get there? Because I think that should be good enough if the Giannis and Dame component works out and all the other changes that Doc Rivers has hinted at on the offensive side of the floor here. So we'll get our first glimpse at it this upcoming Sunday. And look, we've talked about this one a lot too. Where do you see improved defense?
Yeah.
Look, it's as simple as scheme number one and understanding what do we need to do. Being assignment, sure. You're also not mentioning one other player in between those two guys in Dame and Khris Middleton that was just even worse defensively. He's gone. Even if you're not bringing in an all defensive player to replace him, it's an upgrade. DeLon Wright, as you and I have both said, is going to play a lot. I would not be surprised if DeLon Wright closes games for you, and that's a guy that can shoulder some of those defensive assignments and take on bigger players as well. Taurean Prince is a better defender and better player at this point in his career than Jay Crowder was a season ago. So we're not sitting here saying this is the makings of a top 3 defense.
Right.
But I think it's indisputable they will be better, or they should be better than they were a season ago with these changes and additions that they've made. So we get our first look at it on Sunday night, the Bucks and the Pistons, a 7:00 Central Time tip in the Eastern Time Zone, and an ESPN game for the Bucks and the Detroit Pistons in the preseason here. One quick plug to, I know I said it's on ESPN, but there's also a radio broadcast that you can check out with myself and Dave Kane. And I've run into a few more of the everydayers just out and about in public, Camille. I told you about the experience I had at Moda 3 and some more yesterday. So if you're going to be out this weekend at Fiserv Forum for the Blues and the Blackhawks, I'll be there. So don't hesitate to say hello. Same with Camille. If you see her in public, same thing. That'll do it for today's show, though. I think we're going to do a post-gamer. Like, we're already there.
It's that time.
Post-game recaps to get through. We made it through the offseason, and now we're breaking down actual games, even if it is just a preseason game. But that'll be our next show, is a post-game recap preseason game number 1. What changes, if any, did we see? What did we see from the young guys? What did we see from Gary Trent Jr. in his first action in a Bucks uniform? So a lot to break down on Monday's show. That'll do it for today, though. And in closing, to Pete Alonso, he can go somewhere south.
Yeah, we don't want to speak that on this. This is such a positive show, Justin. I can't even think about what happened last night.
Well, what better way to end it? For Camille, I'm Justin. We'll talk to you once again Monday on Locked On Bucks.